Hey, so I know it's been a while, but my objective has been to kind of explore, at least in a way where I can communicate it objectively to you, uh, a connection between the other side of what we call the phenomenon, which is called the noumenon. So, in the ancient Hindu and the Vedas, in their ancient scriptures, and if you check them out, you'll find that they're just about as old as ancient Egypt, if not older. And they date back a long time, and it turns out that they actually describe what is happening before the manifested universe. Before the manifested universe is this other reality that exists above it. It's kind of what Plato would say is the world of forms or the archetypes. It's also called the world of spirit. It's also the invisible, or the world of thought, the thought divine that you might call it, before anything actually manifests in the cosmos. Now, in order to be able to get to this information, I had to look into the work of Helena Blavatsky, because she does a really good job of pointing to the ancient Vedic texts that show us what they're actually talking about, and the descriptions that she uses and the cross-referencing that she does and everything like that, and it all checks out. I've been checking her work out, and it all checks out. And so what we have right here is, and this is the best one that I can find so far, this is not just pulled up out of nowhere. This is based on what you would consider ancient Vedas and the way that they viewed things. Not just the Vedas, but also the ancient Egyptians and many other cultures that you see. And these right here are the different planes that you have. You have the divine plane, the monadic, spiritual plane, intuitional plane, mental plane. And if you notice, there's cosmic associations to each one of these as well. Now at the very top, you notice there's nothing. This is the unknowable, the first cause. It's the very, very first logos. And from that logos actually manifests. Each one of these are different logos, by the way, as well, these different planes. They manifest, like for example, out of nothingness manifests the first or the second logos. And from this one, it spreads out. This is the monad right here. If you notice, the angles of this are the same as the angles of the pyramid. But this spreads out and it moves into the spiritual plane, the intuitional plane, and the plane of the mind, or the monastic plane. And then you have these associations, and it moves all the way down until you get into the physical plane. Now, from what I can see, the actual mental plane, or the plane of the lower mind, or cosmic gaseous, this is about as far up as we can see right here, until it turns into something invisible and moves into the spiritual plane. Now here's what's really weird. The spiritual plane is what we might call thought divine, or divine thought. It's something that you can't really put your mind around, because you can only think in human terms. But this divine thought, in order to create matter, it wills it into existence by thinking about it. And when it thinks about it, it uses a messenger. So in other words, the thought, it's actually thinking about it, and it uses something called fohat, which is not electricity, but it's the kind of like the essence of electricity. So this essence of electricity, or lightning, or what have you, moves over the surface of waters. You've probably heard that one before, right? And what it does is it impregnates chaos, or the waters that you see in space. It impregnates it with spirit, and it gives it this form. It gives it direction. And the first thing that it creates is usually a mirror of itself, in a very rough form, because by the time it gets down to this area right here, it's a reflection of a reflection of a reflection, and it's kind of like that. It's everything is reflected of the thing that's the next higher to it. By the time it gets down to the cosmic gaseous form, we're looking at a reflection of it, but we're looking at a very rough reflection of it because you can't really put your mind around it. For example, the demiurge was known to have created the manifested universe, or the architect of the universe was known to have created it based on the ideal forms. It could look up and see them, and it could pull out what it thought was the correct forms, but once it manifests into reality, it's not exactly the same, but you get a rough idea about kind of what it is. That's the reason we have certain laws, like you see the mathematical Fibonacci spiral. You see that all over nature and things like this. So these are the different planes that you see right here. Now the reason this relates to my work is because for the longest time, as you know, I've been wondering why they have been painting the Orion Nebula in these cathedrals like they have. And this has been dived down into to high detail. For example, we know that Michelangelo painted a brain, and as you can see right here, these are the different folds of the brain exposed inside of his painting. And then the Orion Nebula, which digs into high detail. And as you can see, these images are repeated all the way through. And then I zoom into even higher detail. This is all nebula. This over here is all painting. As you can see, these images are seen all the way through. Now this was done in 1511, and the Orion Nebula apparently didn't even light up until 1611, about 100 years afterwards. So whatever Michelangelo did, he either did it from previous knowledge, or he did it because he pulled from some higher level of consciousness. It's important to remember that the brain is the organ of the mind. And we see that in the planes, and we also see that in many other texts. But the brain is actually the organ of the mind. The brain has its own set of it has its own septenary, and the actual heart of the mind itself is the pineal gland, and that represents the sun inside the mind. Okay, so now come the Vedas text I want to read to you. This is the Yoga Vasistha. And this text, we take a look at the origin. It was written on the 10th century AD, and it's considered one of the most important scriptures of the Vedantic philosophy. The other one I'm going to read for you a little bit of is this Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. I know I messed that up, but that was somewhere around 700 BC, and then some of them, like the Law of Manu and stuff like that, date all the way back to 2000 BC and beyond. So this is what I want to read to you, and if you remember, we looked at this diagram where we had up here, this is just all nothingness, or just total being. And then this is where the manifestation starts happening, or the emanation, we might call it. This emanates from this. This emanates from this. This emanates from this, and so on and so on. So each plane lower emanates from the plane higher than above it. And so when we take a look here, it says, how could the self-cogitation of Brahma, as the infinite spirit and one, be without a second, conceive it in a finite soul other than itself, which is not being? So as you can see, these are the words describing the same thing as far as the planes that we're seeing. It says, the immense and transparent spirit, which means it can't be seen, remained in a state of non-existence, a state ineffable bliss as seen by the adept yogi, but as vastness conceived by the uninitiated novice. Meditation of the infinite is a delight to the spiritualist, but is a horror to the gross idolater, whose mind knows nothing beyond matter and material forms. So it talks about this emanation that's occurring. And the first thing that happens, it says, then sprang a power, a hypostasis, like the germ of a seed, and possessed of consciousness and energy, that is called the living and conscious soul, which must at last be its final liberation. This is the demiurge, an emanation of God. When I looked up the demiurge inside the secret doctrine, it's referring to the second logos. So it's actually referring to this area right here. And then it said the clear mirror of the mind of this being, reflected in its vast, vacuous, or formless sphere, the images of innumerable worlds set above one another like statues engraved upon it. This is all still in the mind now. It's not manifested yet. Living soul is to be an inflation of divine spirit, like the swelling of sea and the burning of a candle. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll down, and I want to show you this part right here. It is by means of positive consciousness that we know our egoism or self-existence. It strikes us more glaringly than a spark of fire and enlightens us to the knowledge of ourselves more than any other light. Our self-consciousness is the clearest of all knowledge and the basis of all truth, according to Descartes. As in looking up to the heaven, its blue vault is presented to the sight beyond which our eyes have not the power to pierce. So in our inquiry to the nature of the soul, we see no more than the consciousness of ourselves and nothing besides. Now when it's talking about ego and stuff like this, we can come back here and we can refer to this, because when we come down here, we got the egoic plane. See, this is the spiritual triad. And then this is the egoic lotus right here. And the causal body. This is kind of like where things start manifesting as individuality. So this is really interesting right here, because when we get to right here, the mind, which is this area right here on the mental plane, it says that, and if you take a look, it says cosmic gaseous, right? It says the mind is opposed to matter, but being the principle of volition produces matter at its will. The quintessential mind next becomes as a spark of fire of itself, and remains as a dim star, a nebula in the midst of the vacuity of the yet unborn universe. The nebula are the primary formations of the heavenly bodies, called Brahmandas, or mundane eggs. So the nebula is the mundane egg, and it sprouts from the mind, and it is actually a reflection of the mind itself, pulled from the archetypes, or the forms, or the spiritual type universe, but it's reflected in what we see in the objective or phenomena. It says the mind takes the form of a spark of fire by thinking on its essence, which gradually develops itself like the germ of a seed in the form of a mundane egg by its internal force. This same fiery spark, called Brahmanda or mundane egg, became as a snowball amidst the water and conceived the great Brahma within its hollow womb. So this mind became a reflection of itself in objectivity, or the real world, which is the nebula. So the nebula is a reflection of mind, and it is the mundane egg. And then it says here, the Spirit of God, dove-like, sat brooding upon the hollow deep, Milton. And this is from Paradise Lost. Now, to those of you that follow the Christian thing, you will see that this is kind of where Christianity picks up. It says, in the beginning, God's created the heaven and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty, and darkness was over the surface of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Now, the very fact that he's hovering over the waters means that the universe was already created. The waters represents the mass of waters that we see in space that has not been impregnated with spirit yet. And spirit is, it impregnates the water by use of fohat or electricity.